your 3-step sandbox for making decisions as a founder. For the last 3 years, I have been tracking just over 100 early stage companies from the day they started to their second fundraise. And of those roughly 100 companies, I coached almost all of them in 2 different ways. And while this is not a rigorous academic study, I have found out something profound. And it's this: those startups that decided upon a way of making decisions before they built anything, spoke to any customers, did any kind of fundraise, raised over twice as much money as those who did not implement that strategy from the beginning. Now, there are 3 components to the strategy I suggest, and it is simply a way of making decisions, because one of my favorite sayings of all time is that focus is the art of saying no. So like all good decision-making strategies, the real trick is having a means of saying no. It's not a means of saying yes, because there are many factors you can say yes. What you need are ways of just ruling options out really fast. And for the 50 or so startups I coached in that manner, they raised over twice the money for those that I didn't. Okay, the strategy I call the sandbox. I'm going to use a little bit of Silicon Valley language here. Please just see through that. I'm using it because it's words that most people use, not because I necessarily think they're the best choice of words. The first component of any good startup's decision matrix, or sandbox, as I call it, is something called a clear mission. Now, the word mission is thrown around a lot. It means many things to many people, but let me be explicit. A mission, as far as a startup is concerned, is simply the who you are ultimately trying to support. So what category or cohort of person are you ultimately trying to support? What challenge do you feel should have been solved by now, but hasn't been solved? Or what behavior are you trying to adjust that needs adjusting? And why? Simple. Who, what, why? I'll give you an example. Google is a great case study for excellent decision-making. When they started the company, when Google began in the mid-90s, they decided to empower curious people with universal access to the world's knowledge, because getting access took too long. It's pretty clear, it's pretty clean. So when you create your first step in a sandbox, when you create your mission, what you're really doing is deciding, who do I really care about? What needs to change? Why hasn't it changed yet? That's the first thing you need to decide. And so when you do thought experiments on who you might hire, or what feature you might build, or what story you might tell, or what PR you might do, you have to ask yourself, before you say yes, or even if any option becomes a viable option, you have to ask yourself, will that impact these people in any material or measurable way? Does it create the behavior that I intend, or support the behavior that I intend? And will they trust me if I do it? Because if you can't answer yes to that thought experiment, your first test of your sandbox, your mission, if it doesn't map to your mission, it's not an option. And you'll see this fairly consistently through all of Google's kind of prior activity. You know, every single product they build was deliberately to help those who were curious to have access to the world's knowledge in an instant manner. So that is the first thing you must include in your sandbox. The second thing I coached over 50 startups to double the rate at which they raise money is identifying their core invention. Now, this language is very specific. An invention isn't an app where you use ChatGPT. An invention isn't like some kind of SaaS product, or you've made a new drink that tastes nice. That's not an invention. That's just a MVP or a product. An invention is what you as founders bring to the table before the company began, before the startup was made. You need something that is fundamentally an improvement on a process, or a unique asset, which is very rare for people like you, or you have some kind of a very niche, precise, unique knowledge that very few people have. In the words of one of my first mentors, John Landry, the founder of Lotus Technologies, he asked me, Chris, what can you do that other people can't? Or what do you know that other people don't? And the reason he was asking that question is because unless I am using that very unique skill, asset, or knowledge or capability, unless I was using that unique thing within every decision that I make, the best I could possibly be is average. So the only way to be exceptional is to use the things that I exceptionally, uniquely have. And that's an invention. So I'll give you an example. In Google's case, their mission: empower curious people with universal access and instant access to the world's knowledge. So what the founders of Google brought to the table before they began anything is that they understood, as academics, that when an academic tries to find new information by being curious about a subject. They look at references. They don't look at indexes or the titles of a paper, at least not first. So what Google did, or what their founders did, is they invented a way of organizing information based upon how well it's been referenced, not whether the question was accurate to the answer. For example, if you were at the time to use Yahoo, Lotus, Lycos, whatever it may be, if you were to say, what is the population of China? All of those search engines would give you good answers. They would say the population of China is, or they'll find articles or content which tells you that. But if you were to ask those things, what should I have for dinner tonight? It gives you nonsense. Whereas Google realized if we sort information based upon how well referenced it is, a good answer is usually at the top, just like in academia. So Google invented, from a tech point of view, they invented referential search. That was their invention. And so you see referential search in every single thing that Google does. You see it from their primary search engine. You'll see it from Google Maps. You'll see it Google Plus and all other things that Google have done. You will see that core capability, that core invention being leveraged at every single turn. So as a founder, your second criteria for knowing if an option, whether it's who you hire, the feature that you build, or the way you tell a story, the second option is a viable option if you can leverage your unique invention in a meaningful way. If you can't, pick something else. Simple as that. Because otherwise the best you will be is average. Now, last but not least, and probably the hardest to mentally grapple with, the last decision-making step I coached them in at the beginning was how to pick their cultural identity. Now, this is a bit of a loose one. Sometimes people call it values, some people call it culture, some people call it principles, some people call it traits. But most of the time, they're using the same words to mean different things. I mean something very, very precise and specific. As founders, your cultural identity are a set of words or statements that you want everyone in your team to have in common. So this is largely a team building or a partner building filter, but it also extends out to brand and to PR and to messaging and to products being kind of consistent and unified. You give yourself a set of statements of which, if you cannot conduct a decision in that way, or if you will not be known for those things after the fact, then that option is not a viable option, because you will be confusing, inconsistent, and you will be very, very hard pushed to be called those things going in future. Google, they started with don't be evil, but we all know that kind of changed. I actually don't know what Google's values were at the time, but you see it in the likes of Nike. And one of their core founding cultural identity principles is, this is in a lot of their material, they make it very clear that their goal is that if you have a body, they want you to feel like an athlete. And that goes through every product that they make, every pair of shoes they make, everything that they sponsor, everyone in their team. They want them to feel like an athlete. So every decision, every executive strategic decision, every product that they make, every piece of marketing they put out is intending to elicit that cultural identity. So let's recap. The sandbox is a 3-step thought experiment for ruling in or ruling out options to a strategic or micro decision. And they are: 1, what is your mission? So the who, why, what of what you do. If your decision or the option you have will not service that mission, rule it out. Don't even bother. No matter how much money you make, no matter how cool it may seem, no matter how well placed you may be, don't do it. It's not relevant. The second thought experiment is: what is your core invention? What can you do that others can't? What do you know that others don't? What did you make which is unique and special of your own original thought and design and execution? If you can't use that well, if you can't implement that in the option, rule the option out. Then lastly, what is your cultural identity? A set of statements that you want to be remembered for. When people describe you and your behavior, they would choose to use these words. If you cannot essentially conduct the option in that way, rule it out. Simple as that. Your 3-step sandbox for making decisions as a founder. And when I implemented just that one technique difference between the 50 companies or so that I mentored in that way and the 50 that I mentored without using that, those that I did raised over twice as much money over 3 years than those that didn't. That is the importance of focus being the art of saying no. And there's a tool to say no. My name is Chris. I'm a 6-time founder, regular investor, and I now research psychology so founders don't make the same mistakes I did. Hope that helps.